Welcome back, passengers. This is your pilot speaking. My name is David Hensley. I'm the owner and creative director of Long Walk Productions, and I am joined once again by my two co-pilots,
Cara Hayes,
Robert Bradford.
And 4 episodes in, I think you guys know the premise of this show by now, so we're going to continue our Lost Season 1 discussion with the next 3 episodes. Solitary, Raised by Another, and all the best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues.
But all the best daddies could have cowboy issues, too.
That would be a very different kind of episode.
My daddy had a lot of cowboy issues, but we don't talk about that too much.
Yeah.
Is All the Best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues the best episode title of this show?
So far.
I think ... and Found is a great one.
That's a good, yeah, that's a good one. All right, well, we're going to start off with episode 9, Solitary, and the very first thing that I wrote down was, thank you, Saeed, for switching to English so quickly.
I understand why they did that, because, unlike Yin Jin Kim, who is fluently bilingual, and Daniel Dae Kim, who apparently spoke some Korean growing up despite living in the United States, he could pick most of it back up on set. Naveen Andrews didn't speak a word of Arabic, so asking him to not just learn his lines in Arabic but speak it convincingly would probably be a pretty tall order and wildly distracting.
Yeah, and also convincingly is kind of a stretch there because it is very obvious that he did not know Arabic. But God bless him, did he try, and I appreciate him for it. But I appreciate switching over to English more.
Yeah, just let the whole rest of, because I'm really trying to imagine some of the scenes he has for the rest of the episode playing out with him visibly concentrating on remembering the sounds he needs to make phonetically.
Yeah.
Don't need that.
Yeah.
I like the way they did it, where it's like they kind of peered around the other side of the person and it was like that he was speaking English. I don't know. I just like that stuff.
That's a nice visual representation to the audience. Like, oh, we're literally switching now.
Yeah.
I like it.
Well, it's like what they did in Hunt for Red October when you have Sean Connery speaking Russian for the first couple of lines, and it just pans in and back out, and he's like, our ship will travel across the Baltic Sea.
And somehow he goes from Russian to Scottish.
And
Sure.
It's Sean Connery, because, we never expected him to sound different.
Nope.
Hey, that happens sometimes. I hear they make a pill for it. I like the structure of these 3 episodes, and just sort of an accident that we picked them this way, because realistically I just wanted to end on a Jack episode since we started on one last week. But looking at it narratively over the course of these 3 episodes, I feel like it really works because this episode, Solitary, is the one that introduces us to Ethan Rom and sets up the idea that there are other people on the island, which is followed up in the next episode. We get to see more Ethan. We get to the reveal that he is an other man. And then that really comes to a head, or builds more, I should say, in how could I forget it? All the Best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues. Is there a way that we can abbreviate that? I'm just going to call it Cowboys for now.
Yeah,
Cowboys and daddies.
That was a very important club in a certain scene in New York in the 70s, but we're not going to talk about that either.
You know what? I'm going to call it Cowboys and Daddies now, just because that's too good to pass up. But anyway, let's talk about Ethan Rom.
So creepy.
He is so fucking creepy. Thank you, Tom Cruise's cousin, for knocking it out of the park. I mean, from moment one, he randomly appears with Locke at night at the caves, and I really feel like put no effort into not being a fucking creep.
I think he just had this, they'll catch on to me sooner or later, but I'll see how much information I can get, to the point that when Hurley's questioning him, he's actually surprised they haven't caught on to him yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. We start getting amazing lines right off the bat with Ethan. It's much like watching it now. It's like we said in the episode about Walkabout. It's very obvious in hindsight. Once you know the twist, once you know that Ethan isn't one of the survivors, the foreshadowing is so incredibly obvious. But it gives us a lot of really great lines, like when he tells Hurley, night is the best time to hunt, which we find out in the next episode. He's essentially been, I wouldn't say hunting Claire at night, but he's been doing some creepy shit. Yeah, he's been doing creepy shit to her. That's fantastic. Kara pulled up a picture of William Mapother's blank stare.
It's one of those images, the look at his face that ends raised by another. I remember it like the color washes out of the rest of the frame. Like it literally is just in a different filter from everything else we've seen, just how much the deadness in his eyes takes over that.
Yeah. Oh, man. He's so good in this role and so freaky.
You forget how much they make him basically a supervillain in his early episodes because, he's able to get close to Claire in, the middle of the caves and then slip away when she wakes up without anybody having any idea he was there. He beats the holy hell out of Jack in their first fight. Locke admits he's better at hunting and tracking. Like, just you're watching this guy and you're expecting it to be like, is he going to just like swing out of the trees and like decapitate somebody next? Is he going to just, take like 3 knives to the chest and just shrug it off and keep coming? You have no idea what this guy's deal is.
If Lost was made now, I feel like all of that would happen.
100%, yeah. Depending on the network that it was on.
Mm-hmm. It would be streaming. Come on.
Oh, yeah. And probably lose some of the mystique because they drop it all at once.
Yes.
Well, there is just a sense that these are the episodes where they've been sort of playing around with their toolbox for the first couple, getting to know the characters, laying out some weirdness of the island. And now they, like you said, David, they really are getting into, okay, here are the plots we want to go with. We're calling our shot for the next couple of seasons. We've got the others. We've got Russo and just her talk about infection, which doesn't really become a big thing, but I do think I remember them coming back to it.
They bring it back briefly in season 6, and it becomes ironic because it's Saeed that ends up getting quote-unquote infected, and he's the first person to hear about this from Rousseau. I can't really remember at this point like what the nature of the infection was, other than he turns into evil Saeed for half a season.
And then, of course, the end of the set of episodes is John Locke and Boone finding a buried metal structure in the forest.
Hatch.
So they're laying out what are going to be kind of the big plot lines for the next 2 seasons.
Yeah.
On this one.
I feel like this episode is really the one where the show started to cook. Because don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the first 8 episodes, but they were all very character centric, and it's just like, okay, this is a show about people surviving on an island, right? And now we get to this set of episodes, and it's like, oh no, this is about these people surviving on an island against all these other forces, and it really, really takes the show to a different level.
Which is interesting because they'd introduced the monster in the pilot episode, the idea that there is something dangerous on the island beyond just, what would befall any group of people cut off from civilization. But having there be humans, like people that we know have some kind of direct motive, even if we don't understand what it is, introduces a very new level of dramatic stakes. And the fact that they target Claire specifically, that they go after, the most vulnerable seeming member of the group, like either her or Walt would be kind of the 2 most defenseless seeming people by the general reckoning. And there's just immediately a whole new register of what everybody needs to be scared of.
Well, I'm going to go back to to Ethan's line once again, night is the best time to hunt, because I don't think it was intentional, maybe not on the writer's part, but that line doesn't really pay off. It's kind of a throwaway line until later in the season. I think it's this season where the others start hunting and killing other survivors at night, right?
If I remember right, when we get to the tail section, that is something they talk about happening, is that the others would come in the night and they would take people.
Yeah.
And so that was just sort of their pattern when they sort of came in mass.
Yeah. Well, they're out, skipping forward to the end of the season, they're out at night hunting for Michael and Walt, not Said, Sawyer and Jin when they're on the raft. It's at night when the main crew, Jack and everybody else, has that great confrontation in the middle of the woods, the light 'em up scene. Which I think is season 2 also.
Yeah.
So it takes a while, and again, I don't think it was intentional, but night is the best time for hunting. Really does pay off later. We talk about how obvious it is once you know the twist, but I think the episode does a good job with the misdirect here of introducing 2 new speaking characters to the cast, Ethan and Rash Guy. How do we feel about the inclusion, the introduction of everyone's favorite long-running character, Rash Guy?
Oh my God, he was so annoying.
He gave it his all. Like he was just like, if I'm gonna be memorable, I'm gonna leave my lines with a mark.
Yeah, he's definitely the kind of obnoxious that a doctor would not want to deal with on a regular basis.
I have a feeling in his regular life, not on the island, he was a total hypochondriac.
I think Jack even says that
Yeah.
at one point, like he's tired of dealing with hypochondriacs. Not much to say there other than it's nice that you're not expecting either of these guys to. You're just at this point they've introduced so many side characters, and you watch this episode and you're like, oh, okay, well, if you didn't know the twist, you'd be thinking, well, how many episodes until we get Ethan's backstory?
Or even that he's just going to be like a guy who has lines and scenes in a few episodes and then is going to die or something.
Yeah.
That they're just building him up to be a little more memorable, so he can be not like a mauve shirt, I think they call it, like a not quite a red shirt who's introduced and dies immediately, but somebody you get to know just enough that it stings a little more without actually having to take out a member of the main cast.
Yeah. As far as you guys remember, as best as you can remember, is there a bigger contrast between A plots and B plots than what we get in this episode? We haven't established yet. This is Saeed's first flashback episode in which we really find out that, yes, he was a torturer. He was a soldier in the Iraqi Republican Guard. We never see him torture anybody on screen. It's just spoken of a lot.
I think we see him like give a few punches to that one guy in his earlier scene, but not to the extent of what he implied he could do to Sawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Not to the extent of what Nadia describes to Saeed.
Yeah.
I did not remember that, and holy shit, like talking about getting drilled through the hands and feet flayed. Yeah, good stuff. So we've got that going on. We've got his flashback while he is getting captured by Russo and getting, ironically, tortured by her, and finding out about Russo's crew and how they crashed there and that there might be other people on the island.
It's a little funny that in the next episode, Sawyer has no idea that this happened, but he does say, no idea if you Islam's got a concept of karma, but after Saeed has just been captured and tortured, he's like, yeah, I think he's wondering on that himself.
Well, there's a lot of great irony in this episode because Saeed gets captured immediately after Jack says to Kate, Saeed's a trained soldier. He knows what he's doing.
To be fair, I don't imagine the Republican Guard's training covered a lot of like jungle warfare. I don't imagine that was something they had a lot of firsthand experience with.
That is a fair point.
But you'd think that, they might have trained in, I don't know, awareness.
Well,
Although, I guess in a jungle, you don't necessarily think you need to be aware of random people who want to jump out and abscond with you.
well, it's a great intro to Rousseau as well, even before we see her, because Saeed spots the tripwire in the jungle, steps over it very carefully, and then steps on the second trap that she's laid for someone specifically who'd stepped over that tripwire.
It goes beyond that because she didn't just specifically set a snare in that one spot. She also, or maybe it was just naturally occurring, but there are those very pointy branches that he swings directly into.
Yeah.
It seemed to me like that was step 3. Step 1, very obvious tripwire. Step 2, snare. Step 3, spiky tree roots, whatever they were.
Given how quickly Saeed blacks out after that, actually I wondered if they were drugged or something, if that was part of her, like, swing them into, like, a coated spike.
That's a good point. Or maybe Saeed just gets knocked out really easily because he just gets, like, tapped on the head later and is knocked out once again. Well, I think, was it Archer that did the joke about how easy it was to knock somebody out, like just getting knocked out by light taps?
I mean, technically, there are pressure points that you could basically touch and, or like thump just a little bit and you'll go out.
The ultimate, like, you had the opportunity to do the funniest thing there, or like tap yourself on the head and then pass out.
I'm thankful I didn't.
I am too. That would have just left me and Robert here talking like assholes.
Oh, you do? Well, thanks for just leaving me here. Appreciate that.
Well, we can't have dead air.
We got a timetable to get this episode out, Cara.
Exactly.
Okay. Good point.
Well, we say all that. That's the A plot of the episode. Very dark, very heavy stuff that's really weighing on our main character this episode. Then the B plot is Hurley makes a golf course.
Which in its own way is kind of also very central to where the series is going to end up going with Hurley as a character. The idea that he sees, after, Jack sees to people's health and Locke sees to people having food and all of that. Hurley is the one who looks and is like, we need to do something so we're not just going to be waiting for the next terrible thing to happen. And yeah, like that ability of his is going to be something that pays off a lot in the next couple of seasons.
Well, I think we can expound on what you just said. Jack sees people's health. Locke sees people's food, like need for food, and Hurley just sees people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you think about it, you could say, Saeed thinks in terms of security and safety, and Kate is Kate. Mm-hmm. And,
Sawyer thinks of how to grift people.
Well, yeah. We got to go with our skills.
Mm-hmm. And Hurley just thinks about taking care of people. This is the beginning of peak Hurley. We talk a lot about, characters dialing in. Like Jack's episode, his first flashback episode, Matthew Fox had really dialed into Jack. It just left my head. Josh Holloway in his Sawyer episode, by then he'd really dialed into Sawyer. And here we see Jorge Garcia has really dialed into Hurley. And this is the beginning of how much I really love that character. He has the best jokes during this run. Now that they've sort of taken Charlie off in a different direction, like post-heroine Charlie, it's really Hurley that starts picking up the comic relief.
And some of it's not even lines that are necessarily funny on paper. It's just Jorge Garcia's delivery. Like when he's talking to Jack about finding out who everybody is, he says, my name isn't Hurley, it's Hugo Reyes. Hurley's a nickname I have. Why? I'm not telling. And like not exactly a funny line, but it's just I laugh every time I rewatch that episode.
Yeah, in that same vein, when he's talking to Jack at the beginning of Solitary, he's talking about like, people need entertainment, people need something to do. We're all miserable, and Jack's like, things could be worse. There is a brilliant pause before Hurley's voice goes up several octaves, and he says, "How?" Great stuff, but man, what a contrast between torture and past trauma versus golfing.
As Saeed embarks on what is going to be the first of several doomed love stories on the show. We talked about the relationships that the show sets up, but Saeed is the first time we see kind of the lost love figure that a couple of characters are going to turn out to have.
It is a very weird arc for him, I feel, in this episode, because you find out him and Nadia knew each other as kids, haven't seen each other in what seems like 15, maybe 20 years. She shows up as a prisoner. He has to torture her for several weeks, and they are madly in love with each other to the point where he is willing to kill his commander to cover her escape.
And shoot himself in the leg.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Doesn't really feel earned, in my opinion. I don't think we're shown enough or given enough between Saeed and Nadia for that to really pay off. Am I wrong?
I think it's kind of it's a cheat of what the writers can do with the fact that we've seen him in the present, and we've seen sort of how he, like you talked about last time, he does seem to have this sort of protectiveness towards other people, and we see it a lot with Kate because they're around each other so much. So you can kind of see present Saeed's attitude shining back on this past Saeed, even though it doesn't, like you said, it does not make sense that a guy who's been a career soldier in what was not a very nice army to be a part of, and a guy who has specifically honed his skills as a torturer and interrogator, it does seem like it would take more to get to that soft center. But I think that, we feel like we know who Saeed really is, so they can kind of cheat and show the flashback. Yeah, he's still that guy even back then. I also think, the actress who plays Nadia does a nice job with the little sense she has of just oh yeah, she's just had this miserable life for so long, and, it may not even be legitimate on her part that this could just be another way to get back at an interrogator because she has something she can use against him. And then, when he proves that he really will put it all on the line for her, she, writes that note for him. And he implies in his conversation with Russo that she's dead. Although at the end of the episode, he has no reason to think that.
Yeah.
And plus, I'm pretty sure we find out later, in the present day sections of the show, I mean, that was the whole reason he was going to Los Angeles, right?
Yeah.
That's where she relocated.
Yeah, that he had been told she would be there, and that's why he got on the plane.
Yeah. I mean, if you're faking someone's death, I guess commit, especially to this rando you just met on a desert island. He has no reason to say she's dead. Well, actually, I faked her death, and she's living under an assumed name in a different place. But for the purpose of this conversation, she's dead. I killed her.
Well, turning it back to interrogation dynamics, though, it could also be Rousseau has only been asking him, where is Alex? Tell me where Alex is. So he's
Donde
like,
está Alex?
yeah. That rap from Community's in my head. I'm going to let that pass for a minute. But, it could just be that he says, okay, she's lost someone. I'll tell her that I've lost someone too. And that's a way of bonding that will get her to stop shocking me.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, we touched on it briefly already, but this is the first episode where we get the mention of the others, who they clearly had not dialed into yet, because we get several different versions of what the others are. We get like the savages that were initially introduced to, before we get the whole side society living on the island that is the Dharma Initiative. But there's going to be a lot of otherness over the next 5.5 seasons. And this is the first time we get that set up.
Yeah. They do decay just a little bit, I would say, from kind of the height of, the nightmare fuel that we have with Ethan's first appearance. But
stealing children, killing people on the beach.
I also think in a great, example of depicting or of having a character describe a terrifying thing and just letting their face and their fear convey what's happening. I think Mira Furlan's, like every time she talks about them and like the whispers she hears in the forest, it does a nice job of setting up like, okay, just knowing that these people are out there has driven this woman to such a ragged point, so that when we see Ethan and he has that look, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I see why Rousseau has felt this way.
The last thing that I wanted to talk about for this episode was, I know I just last week complained about on-the-nose endings, especially with the music montages, but every episode up to this point has had like a clear, build, rising action, climax, denouement, and I felt like this episode just ends. Like, Saeed's out in the woods, voices, end. Did anyone else feel that way? Am I crazy?
I mean, I noticed it, but I mean, I guess it didn't bother me. Like, maybe I don't know. It didn't really seem to. I mean, it was abrupt based on what we've seen thus far, but I didn't think it was whatever that word is.
I think as a coda to kind of his, when he leaves Rousseau, he can feel pretty comfortable. Saeed can feel pretty comfortable that, she's never actually seen these others that she's talking about. She killed all the members of her team because she thought they were sick, but maybe she's not such a good judge of that. Maybe she's just a damaged, lonely person. And he can walk away with feeling that's kind of been tied off. But then hearing the whispers in the jungle around him is suddenly like, oh crap, what else was she right about? Mm-hmm. So in sort of I feel like if they were doing it later, they probably would have added maybe a little bit more of a build than just sort of a pan around his face and then a cut to black. But I like where it fits thematically.
Yeah. Yeah, it just it was abrupt enough and different enough that I took note of it, literally and, figuratively.
One thing I wanted to mention about the episode is Rousseau is the second figure we have on the show who's named for a philosopher. And John Locke seems like it was just kind of a cool name that they decided to go with. But I did some reading on Rousseau, and I'm not going to do a full summary of anything, but apparently one of Rousseau's famous quotes was talking about how political systems and inequalities restrict people. Rousseau had a quote saying, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains," which is funny given that Rousseau ties up and tortures Saeed for most of the episode. Also, interestingly, Rousseau was very big on the idea that in the state of nature that humans are they exist naturally in a state of pure, uncorrupted morality, and that we're corrupted by our society and by the existence of unjust systems, which is interesting that Rousseau is actually out in a state of nature and is driven to a point of near insanity. So
I really have to hope or want that was intentional by the writers, because I think that's a very, if not, it's a extremely lucky coincidence.
Yeah. And if I were those writers, any one of them, I would 100% now be saying, yeah,
No,
we
did that on
totally
purpose."
intended that from the
Yeah.
very beginning. Why
Yeah.
do you think we called her that?
Yeah.
I think we ought to add a new segment to the show. I've just been adding these like week to week, like were they dead all along watch. And coming up, we've got I Watch and Bad Dad Watch. We need to add Philosophy Watch because I want to hear you explain more about these different philosophers as they get name dropped as characters in the show.
Agreed.
So let's keep Philosopher Watch a thing going on.
Well, when we meet Charlotte, just be ready for that to be the whole episode because I'm going to break out just volumes on
C.S.
that.
Lewis?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's do it.
I'm just going to hold up my recording of the Andy Serkis Screw Tape Letters performance and just shush y'all while we listen to all 6 hours of that.
Oh, boy.
Sweet. I'll take a nap and drink coffee.
Well, so we're going to move on to episode 10, Raised by Another. But you guys might notice here, this is where I started paying attention to the days on the island. And I did not look back and calculate these myself. I went to Lostpedia to figure this out because Kate mentions to Jack at the beginning of this episode that the last episode, that Saeed's been gone for a week.
Yeah.
So somebody on Lostpedia was, what's the word that I'm looking for here? Conscientious enough, like obsessive enough maybe, to go back and figure out, okay, day 1 they did this, day 2 they did this, and calculate where they are at in that timeline. Because this episode starts on day 15. So they have had 2 full weeks on the island now. And we've also skipped a day because by their calculation, Solitary, episode 9, took place over days 12 and 13. So now we've skipped over day 14, which probably, it must not have been that memorable for our Losties. And we're
Sunbathing.
Saeed was really limping when he was trying to get back to camp.
I guess he's further along, like much further along into the island than we thought he was. But anyway, so Raised by Another, it's our first Claire flashback episode. We start off with, like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, I Watch. This is Claire the third character who's...
So I did look this one up, also using Lostpedia. Of the 11 episodes we've done, including this whole set, 6 of them have started with the eye opening. The pilot opens with Jack. Locke opens with Walkabout. In White Rabbit, we actually see in a flashback, young Jack opening his eyes. Sun for her episode, Charlie and the Moth, and then now Claire in Raised by Another.
I only picked up on 3 of those.
Wow.
Holy shit. I thought this was the third one. Obviously, Jack at the beginning of the pilot, and then Sun. I think that might be because you pointed it out, I think,
Yeah.
Robert, when we watched it together. And then this one opens on Claire's eye during her nightmare sequence.
Which, while we keep the eye theme going, also has a bit where she finds Locke at a table, and he looks up at her, and his eyes are just one black and one white orb.
Yeah.
And also Locke, very noticeably, has a scar going over his right eye from the crash. So not only are they using eye symbolism, it's like a giant arrow pointing at Locke as well.
Yeah. I'd call that on the nose, but it's his eyes, not his nose. I don't know why it is so interesting to me watching this show now, 20 years removed from it, to like track the backstories of these characters, because most of them are somewhere in their 30s, like Jack, Kate, Sawyer, Saeed. You've got younger characters in their 20s like Hurley and Charlie. And then there's Claire, who's got to be like 19, 20 years old.
Did she say 19 or 20 at some point? I feel like she mentions it in this episode.
Well, Shannon tells Hurley that she's 20 years
There
old
it is,
when
that's
he's doing
right.
his census.
Yeah.
But the show, like canonically, their day 1 was the day the show aired, September 22nd, 2004. So that means that going by the timeline presented in this episode, Jack says Claire's like a week away from popping out that baby, which means that the time of conception was January of 2004. And for some reason, just thinking about that took me down a rabbit hole of like, all right, so then Charlie and The drive shaft had to have become famous in the late 90s. Jack's flashback had to have taken place in the late 80s.
Well, his dad talks about watching Carol Burnett after a hard day of surgery.
Yep. I don't know why. Does anybody else find that like timetable as interesting as I do?
I think it's more interesting now because watching it live and you're just like, oh yeah, this is 2004. So they're talking about a thing that happened 5 years ago to the character. It was 5 years ago in my life. But yeah, the same as when you watch any kind of period piece within living memory and you're trying to sort of put yourself back into where you were when that happened and what would have felt recent, what would have felt current at that time. Yeah, no, it's interesting to think about.
Well, 20 years ago still was the 80s for some of us.
Yeah.
Was and always will be.
Amen.
No matter how old I get.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. All right, so this is the second episode in a row in which the first time we see Kate, she is standing on the beach at the edge of the ocean looking out like at the horizon. How much time over these 15 days do you think Kate has spent just standing there looking out?
13 and a half.
It's easily. It's gotta be, right?
Was it when we were watching not this past batch of episodes, but one where I think Katie was watching with us, your wife, and she just came up and was like, Does Kate ever do anything but walk up to people and ask, what's going on?
Well, clearly it's that and stand on the beach looking out, which it's a beautiful scene. You can't blame her, but in Raised by Another, she's standing there looking out and Jack approaches her because she's worried about Saeed, how long he's been gone. In this episode, Jack approaches her on the beach because he's concerned about Claire, who's been up all night screaming like a fucking banshee. Can we take a second pause here to talk about Emily DeRavin and her fucking screams?
Kind of shocked that she only, I think, has one horror film in her filmography, which was The Hills Have Eyes.
By God, let's get her more.
2000s, but yeah, it was like she had Scream Queen pipes.
Yeah.
Katie got so annoyed sitting there next to me. Like the longer that Claire screamed, the more upset Katie got about it. It was great.
Oh, so it did a good job.
Yeah. Believe me, if I was living in those caves and I woke up to that 2 mornings in a row, I would not be pleased either.
I think the problem is that, as Nicole Kidman demonstrated, the word baby cannot be said dramatically with an Australian accent. So, yeah, there's a deep pull. But yeah, every time she's like, someone's trying to hurt my baby, I'm just like, I'm sorry. That's a real cause of concern. Although I can't blame her for being annoyed, because everybody in this episode does that awful thing people do in TV when someone's like, you don't believe me, do you? And they don't say no, but they do that thing where they look to the side and exhale slightly. And it's just like, good Lord, none of these people have poker faces.
No. Well, we already knew that Jack did not have a good bedside manner, but it turns out neither does anyone else. Well, we very quickly find out, just again, establishing how great Hurley is as a character, that he is probably the smartest character on the show at this point. And we're talking about like expert level con man and PhD holding doctor. I think Hurley might outsmart all of them.
It's just the idea of being genre savvy. He's the guy who's like has a sense of what kind of story they're in that nobody else quite has. And yeah, so he'll just be like, why haven't we figured out who's where and what all of our names are? It's just like, yeah, we really should have done that probably like the first night we were here, to be honest.
Yeah. And then when they find out about the flight log or the manifest with all the names of all the passengers on it, he goes to Sawyer because of course Sawyer has it. And there's no like, oh, Hurley has to do something for Sawyer. He has to trick him out of it. They have to fight over it. He just like in one sentence convinces Sawyer just to give him the manifest, which is something that no other character on the island has been able to do thus far, which is get something out of Sawyer.
Yeah.
Well, I think that speaks to Hurley's emotional intelligence, because I think that's really what he's got, is he's able to understand people, what they need. And he's just, I think he uses that, and maybe not intentionally, but I think that's just the character as a person.
He makes connections with people.
Yes.
Man, he should really be the one running that island. Don't you guys think?
A lot of crazy stuff would have to happen to get us to that place.
Yeah.
6 years of crazy stuff.
Yeah. But on island, only 3 years worth.
Eh?
All right, so continuing our hyphen watch talk. Bad Dad watch. Because now we're on to Claire's baby daddy and how fucking awful that guy is, huh?
I will say that actor does a really good job of like the sweet sincerity in the first flashback, which makes the second bit where he's just like, yeah, this is hard, I'm out, so brutal to watch.
He is such an
Yeah.
insufferable little shit.
Yeah.
I always do have a little bit of sympathy for characters like that in fiction, even as they're doing terrible things. I kind of relate to people who clearly are like, I could be a good enough person to rise to this challenge and do the right thing, and then slowly realize, oh, no, I can't. I'm not that kind of a good person at all. Oh, crap. Not to justify it, but it's just, yeah, it's an arc that feels very human.
It does, and especially given their ages, because he can't be that much older, if at all, than Claire is. He's got to be around 20, early 20s. And I think back now to my early 20s, and I was also kind of an insufferable little shit. Miraculously, I never got anyone pregnant and then, talked them into keeping it, only to then leave them later. But it comes with the territory of being a 20-year-old, I think.
Especially a 20-year-old man.
We also get a drive-by Bad Daddy where during their breakup argument, he does mention that Claire has daddy issues because her dad ran off, just kind of an oblique reference. And while Claire later is going to mention to the couple that she wants to give her baby up to, that she remembers her dad singing a lullaby to her as a kid, it's implied that that's kind of one of the only memories she has of him.
Well, I mean, we're getting way ahead of ourselves, but we know who her dad is.
We have met her bad daddy.
Yeah. Because it's Jack's dad. It is Christian Shepherd. There's no inkling of that here yet. But that's quite the reveal later on that Claire and Jack are brother and sister.
Clearly not something they'd planned out, but I do think that is a case of the writers really neatly tying two things together when they were like, well, what is a reason that he would have been in Australia in the... Hey, now.
Mm-hmm.
It also, retrospective, and just watching it and knowing that, all the scenes with Jack tending to Claire, even if he's kind of clumsy about it and how he tries to address her fear and her anxiety, it is kind of sweet to look back and be like, okay, he's being a big brother to her. However imperfectly, he's looking out for his kid sister.
Yeah. Totes adorbs.
And Emily de Ravine is just across the board, just cute as a button.
Is that
in
how
all
you
of these
say
episodes.
that?
I think it's Emily, even though it's spelled like Emily.
I was thinking of the last name.
Oh.
De Ravine. I've been saying De Ravin.
Might be DeRavin. That one I don't know.
If you're listening to this actress who played Claire named Emily, I'm very sorry. Hey, email me.
We all think you're super cute.
She is so fucking adorable.
I know. I fucking hate how cute she is. It hurts.
It does, especially when you put her up next to Shannon, who I know that you hate. Good stuff. All right, we're gonna go back to what we talked about earlier. Ethan getting the best lines, the best on the nose lines, although we don't realize it yet. When Hurley is putting together the first version of the manifest before he knows that there is an actual manifest, when he's getting Ethan's information out of him, he says, "You'd think that after a few weeks on the island, we'd all know each other." And Robert, do you want to say the line?
And Ethan just kind of looks off to one side and goes, "Yeah, you would think that."
So good, so well delivered, so well written, considering how this episode ends. William Mapother is yeah, that's right. Yeah, William Mapother is just eating this shit up. I've been so focused on like making sure I'm saying William Mapother right that I'm just now realizing his name is Map Other. 20 years after watching the show for the first time.
It was right there in plain sight on his SAG card.
Yep, we should have known. Anybody have anything more to say on that brilliant line? Yeah, you would think that.
Just very much jumps out on the second viewing. Really, that whole scene of him just oh so casually asking why Hurley is collecting this information.
Is the first indication that, oh shit, they're going to figure me out. Time to escalate this shit.
And it's not obvious that that's why he's even asking it until you know.
Yeah.
But we also, given that we get our indicator of it in this episode because they go after Claire, and then in subsequent seasons we will find out that the others are very interested in what happens to pregnancies on the island. But the fact that another thing that might escalate his timetable is that Charlie comes running up being like, Claire's having her baby, she's having it right now. And that might also be a moment where he's like, okay, no time for subtlety, we got to take her.
All right, so part of Claire's flashback, the other half of it, it's not all bad baby daddies. It's also psychics that her friend in Australia takes her to for some reason.
Listen, we've all been 18, 19 women, people.
I haven't personally.
Well, you haven't yet. But, I mean...
Maybe in another
we
life.
Go through a lot of weird stuff that we'll buy into when we're young and looking for something.
Did you go to see a psychic when you were that age?
No, I have not been to see a psychic, but I spent much of college, probably a couple of years in college, doing tarot.
I went to see, my mom actually wanted, for some reason, there was a period in her life where she was into that mystic stuff, and she took me to a palm reader who told me that I had a dark aura and gave me one of those candles that I was supposed to light every day for 15 days in order to expunge that dark aura. And I clearly...
You totally did.
I didn't
I can
burn,
tell.
Yeah.
No, you did. Yeah.
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 Thank you. I appreciate that. I definitely totally burned that candle every day for 15 days.
Thanks, Mom.
Robert,
And your aura has been one of the things I've always noticed about you. Just that bright glow.
Yeah, just hovering here around me. It's too bad that the listeners can't see this aura. They can hear it in the background though. Those aren't cars going by. That's my aura making engine noises. Robert, have you been to a psychic, been to a palm reader, anything like that?
Let's see.
This is the getting to know the host segment.
Once upon a time, I dated someone who I think was very into tarot and offered to do a reading, and I declined. So,
I remember her.
Yeah, I think that's about it. Otherwise, no. Yeah, I mean, I've done stage magicians who can do the kind of you're thinking of. I can tell you're thinking of something.
Cold reading.
Yeah. So I've seen people do that, but I've never had a reading done on me.
Gotcha. Well, I don't think I would have picked up on this if you hadn't pointed it out. That's just going to be a recurring theme. You make the best observations, Robert. But this is the first indication, I think, that of something mystical happening off island.
I did a little reading on that. Apparently, that was a sticking point when they were first breaking down this episode, as in the writers' room, was whether or not they wanted to allow that supernatural things could happen to these people before the plane crash. Because they were like, once we introduce that, then it's something we can explore all the way across. But does that make the island seem less valuable and less significant as a change point in their lives? And they ended. And what's really weird is this whole thing that seems to make that unequivocally the case, that mystical things were following them before they ever got on the plane, is one they end up undoing later. Because I couldn't remember it at the time, but I did look it up later. Later episodes have this psychic reappear, and he tells another character, he tells Echo in flashbacks that he's a fraud, that he just made stuff up and researched people, which doesn't eliminate the possibility that maybe Claire was the one person he ever got a real reading on, but it seems like they actually had a way out for that. Although I am tickled by the idea of a psychic who gets a vision of a plane crash, and his reaction is not to immediately be like, oh no, I must tell someone, how can I prevent this? His reaction is to make sure an additional person gets on the plane, and that person is a heavily pregnant woman.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, he actually gets two people on that plane.
Well, I kind of thought, at least based on what he said, it almost seemed like, oh, geez, you're carrying the Antichrist. Let's put you on that plane that's going to crash.
Which
take care of that problem.
Aaron does not really turn out to be anything other than a normal big-headed baby.
Yeah, I don't know what the intention was behind Aaron. I don't know why. We're never given an explanation for why Claire had to be the one to raise him, why he couldn't be raised by another. That's just one of those season 1 mysteries that never gets a payoff. Even in the epilogue that they tacked on, what is it, The Man Behind the Curtain?
Yeah.
Which I've never
Or
actually...
meet the new boss, I think.
Okay. I never actually watched it. I just know of its existence and generally what it's about. So, yeah, the mystery of Aaron never gets an explanation. Sorry, first-time watchers. You're just going to have to make up a headcanon for that one.
Which, again, if the explanation is the psychic was a fraud and was just...
fucking with a pregnant woman?
Yeah, spending what could not have been a small sum of money to buy her a plane ticket to Los Angeles.
After refusing her money.
Yeah.
That came out of his own pocket.
That is an elaborate con. Sawyer would be impressed.
An elaborate con and also deeply unhingedly psychotic.
They reveal, like, maybe we're going to reveal one day that somebody at Los Angeles is waiting to, like, get Claire's Australian equivalent of a social security number, and that's when they'd really start their con. I don't know. But, yeah, that's... With Walt, I understand what they were hoping to do there, and I understand why the actor's growth spurt kind of forced them to sidetrack those plans. I can't imagine that they envisioned a time frame for this show where, like, Aaron could grow up enough to be a significant figure in the story. Mm-hmm. I mean, this early on, they could have had, time travel, visitors from the future, any of that coming into play, but...
Dinosaurs.
Yeah, it was... I think that early thing of just sprinkle special on all of our elements, that, we have a kid on the island, well, it's a special kid. We have a pregnant woman, oh, she's pregnant with a special baby, and some of that pays off, and... some of it really just kind of fades off into the corner.
Yeah. Well, the last thing that I wrote down was William Mapother, creepiest stare. Well, we already talked about that. It bears repeating just because that's how the episode ends. And the show, for pretty much the first time, gets its first on-screen villain. At this point, we don't know what the smoke monster is. Locke does, but the audience and none of the other Islanders do. This is the first time, and it's taken us 10 episodes to get there, that there is an actual antagonist on the show. And it's a well-done reveal. Partly William Mapother's sudden appearance, and I don't mean physical appearance, just the way that he shows up in front of Claire and Charlie. And just the setup is great.
It helps that he doesn't have... someone like, I don't know, top of my head, Jackie Earle Haley, just one of those character actors who just has a very memorable, defined, odd-looking face. He's a normal-looking dude, and then, which makes it all the creepier when he just switches it on, because you don't think of him, he doesn't look movie star handsome, and he doesn't look immediately sinister. He's just middle of the road until he switches into other mode.
I don't know, I was kind of looking at some pictures, and I don't know, he just kind of does look creepy in real life.
He has played a lot of those characters, so it's probably not hard to find those pictures.
Even pictures of him smiling just kind of made me go, ugh.
Well, the reveal is also, it works great because it's coupled with another one of those wham moments that the show was so good at early on, like Locke was in a wheelchair, that reveal, like Sons, I need to talk to you in English. Here we get Hurley telling Jack, Ethan wasn't on the plane. And then we cut to him approaching Charlie and Claire.
Which is also at the same time that Saeed has stumbled back into camp and managed to get out the words, "We're not alone."
Yeah.
And so in the moment they're still processing that, that's when Hurley comes in and drops that, not only are we not alone, they're here.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant stuff. All right, so we're going to get into Cowboy Daddies, episode 11. All the best Cowboys have daddy issues.
I had actual goosebumps. That's what I was showing Cara.
Oh, love that. We are still on day 16 on the island, and we're going to start with a question that Robert posed to the two of us when we were watching together. Who has the best jungle run?
Not Hurley.
Not Hurley. There's a lot of jungle running that's going to happen over the course of this show. So, Cara, you've had some time to ponder. Who's got the best jungle run?
Kate.
Okay.
Her run at the end of the pilot definitely gives her a pretty solid claim on that.
Mm-hmm.
I really like Matthew Fox's jungle run because I think he puts his upper body into it so much, like he's pulling himself past branches and just hurling himself forward. Like, there's just, even if I'm sure they're filming this on a spot in a path of the jungle where there's nothing the actor could actually run into, he just really sells that he's navigating in and around and past obstacles.
Jack was going to be my answer too, because his running is fucking unhinged. It's much, much later in season 2 where we see how he met Desmond for the first time when he's just out for a normal light jog. So the comparison between that and every time we see him running through the jungle on the island is insane. Love it. It's the weirdest character choice. Along with the next one that I wrote down, you guys have to. I pointed it out last episode. You guys are noticing it now, aren't you? Jack's constant.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Just Jesus Christ! Close your mouth, Matthew.
Well, they keep putting him in situations where, your character is like on the edge. You're burned out. You haven't slept. Your adrenaline is spiked up. And yeah, the breathing is a big part of the way Fox commits to that.
It is, and I can't imagine being like one of the sound designers or the recording people on the show, because it was obnoxious to me hearing my own panting into the microphone. And I'm certain I'm going to apologize for that now, listeners who are, have their headphones in or hear this in their car, that you had to listen to me and Cara both panting into the microphone, because to be the guy on set monitoring that, just standing there cringing, listening to him pant. Ugh. God. All right. Really, maybe you guys have got more. I didn't take a whole lot of notes about Cowboy Daddies. At one point, while talking to Locke, Boone foreshadows his own fate when he explains the concept of red shirts to Locke, which is a Star Trek concept for those who aren't aware. Robert, you explain this one. You know it better than I do.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's kind of the classic trope in the 60s era Star Trek where you'd have the command officers would wear gold uniforms and the science officers would wear blue, and then the red shirts would be engineering. And every time they'd go on an away mission, a couple of extras in red shirts would be around, and when you needed to show the audience, there's a monster, there's a big threat, one of those guys dies, usually horribly. And so red shirts became kind of a joke for the expendable extras who were just there to add a body count. Even as Star Trek actually very quickly moved on to the red shirts being what the commanders wore. So if you ever watch like The Next Generation and like, well, wait, but Picard's a red shirt, it's because it was not a running thing. That reference is also funny because Terry O'Quinn, who plays Locke, was on an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. He plays an admiral whose whole thing is back when he was a captain, he got most of his crew killed and expects Riker in the present to follow his orders without question, and that's like the big conflict of the episode. So Locke responding with, well, it sounds like a piss poor captain who gets all those guys killed, is also a fun little nod to that.
Nice.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Well, guys, I think it's tragic, and we're all going to be heartbroken when it happens, but now we're on the long road to Boone's unfortunate fate. It's only a matter of time until we get to his booneral, as Michael Giacchino espoused.
How long do I have to wait?
He and Terry O'Quinn actually do have kind of a fun dynamic together, though. I see why the writers just... the line that I think you highlight later about if there's anyone your brother's safe with, it's Locke, might indicate that the writers were already sort of putting their pieces in place, but... Mm-hmm. Yeah, the idea that Boone just kind of recognizing, wow, this old guy really knows a lot of cool stuff, to the point that when Locke tells him, yeah, I used to work at a box company, Boone's just like, well, obviously he's making that up.
Well, Locke also proves that he can predict the weather down to the minute. When he says flat out, it's going to start raining in 1 minute, and then it does, which is just, I guess, partly being on Magic Island and partly is survival is training, which I'd love to have known how that worked. Poor Boone. We're getting there. Let's talk about Bad Dad Watch, part 2.
This is Bad Dad Microscope, this episode.
Yeah, it really is. Last episode, we got Claire's horrible baby daddy. And now we got the return of Christian Shepherd, continuing just to be the fucking worst. Drunk on the job, accidentally killed a woman.
and then tries to spin it around on Jack. Like, well, if you hadn't come in and interrupted me, and Jack just eventually flat out says, I came in and interrupted you because a nurse told me your hands were shaking, which I'm not a trained physician or anything, but my understanding is hand shaking is a really bad thing for surgeons.
Generally, yeah.
I would think so.
I think it's frowned upon. Yeah, what an absolute piece of shit. And then the fact that retrospectively paints a very different picture of Jack's first flashback episode, that his own mother blames him for ruining his father's career and his name in medicine. Christian Shepherd killed a woman.
He deserved every bit of what he got.
In that first flashback with Jack, he's talking about a kid who died on the operating table in front of him, which sure happens time to time, but yeah, he's clearly been a alcoholic of low to mid functioning for a long time by the time this episode comes around.
And he makes the argument repeatedly that she would have died anyway because of her internal injuries. And also, I'm pretty sure you might remember better than I do, Robert. Aren't they talking about Boone and Shannon's mother? Or it's Shannon's mother.
So that comes later, because that's in the second season premiere. Because Jack has to choose between triaging Sarah and Shannon's dad.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right. So that's not this episode.
I don't think the woman who dies in this episode turns out to have any bigger connection. She's just a patient who dies.
Okay, I had that backwards. But anyway, yeah, Christian Shepherd tries to make the argument that her internal injuries were too severe. And that might be the case, but you nicking her whatever sack, they say the name of it repeatedly, but I also am not a doctor. Hitting that with a scalpel because of your shaky ass hands probably didn't help her condition any.
Another great moment of dialed in Matthew Fox acting is when he comes into his dad's office to confront him and be like, you clearly screwed up. You were clearly drunk. And making it clear that he's going to report honestly what he thinks happened. And then as his dad unleashes the full manipulative broadside of, look, I've been hard on you because I knew that's what it would take to make you the great doctor and to see Matthew Fox's face go from, okay, he's clearly manipulating me, oh dang it, but I really wanted to hear him say this.
Right.
Like to recognize it but still realize that it's working.
Gaslighting the fuck out of Jack. Did anyone else get the impression that in the off-island flashbacks, Jack looked like he was always just constantly shaking like a chihuahua? He had that like nervous energy the entire episode.
He also has a way of, and I think it's because we usually see him in t-shirts on the island, but when he's wearing like the dress shirt of a doctor, and I think he's got a necktie on in the final flashback, he does have a way of kind of pulling his head back in a little bit to his torso in a way that
makes him look like a big turtle.
They had to be thinking about that when they gave him the beard and everything for the season 3 finale, and we're just like, Matthew Fox does this thing. Let's maximize that to just show him in like his lowest state as the character.
Jack the Turtle.
Jack the Turtle. Well, he goes on to prove that his fighting skills have not improved over the last 20 years because he then later, as Robert pointed out earlier, gets his ass kicked by Ethan. And I actually love this fight scene because just because you're the protagonist doesn't mean that you're great at fighting, which is something that a lot of movies and TV shows really want to impress upon us. Yes, this prestigious medical doctor is also a kickboxer who will beat the fuck out of you. No, Jack's just a dude who is picking a fist fight with somebody who clearly already knows how to fight and just fucking dismantles Jack.
They do kind of stack the odds a little bit by having Jack take a really bad fall off. He's exhausted. He's been running full tilt through the jungle. And that's probably their excuse for why, when we do get a rematch between them later on, it goes differently. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I actually just like that. Yeah, Jack, he loses. He tries to fight the bad guy, and the bad guy beats the crap out of him.
Well, all of this leads to Ethan stringing up Charlie in one of the first big fake outs on a show that loves killing characters. I feel like they kind of shit the bed on this one because killing Charlie at this point would have been tragic. We wouldn't have gotten his arc, and we wouldn't have gotten Not Penny's boat. But man, what a gut punch would that have been to end this episode on. But all of that leads to the tried and true trope of just performing CPR on another person by just hammer punching the shit out of their sternum.
As a last resort, though. I mean, you know, he did CPR for however long, but then he just had to wail on him. I hate that so much.
Well, no, hold on. You're not telling the whole story here, because while he is punching, he is also shouting, "Come on, Charlie, come on. Breathe, Charlie,
Yeah.
come on." And that's, you know, it's the verbal coaching that really, I think, gets Charlie's lungs working again.
Yeah.
Well, I saw a snippet of an interview with the writer of this episode, whose name I'm going to say very slowly to make sure I don't fuck it up. Javier Grillo Marxwaj.
Oh, he's one of their regulars, isn't he?
Yeah, for the first 2 seasons he was. And he said that everyone in the writer's room understood what a cliched trope that was, but they all felt like they earned it.
No.
No, I'm watching the
No.
episode and I'm like, oh.
And then it just kept going and going, and it was like, just either kill him or let him come back to life. Like, if it would have gone on for 5 more seconds, I'd have been
Well,
out.
with punching the sternum like he was, I think he did both.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
It's only because of the island's magic that Charlie's entire sternum wasn't just caved in.
Should have been by that point, yeah.
They made, the end of this episode, they made so many weird choices with how this CPR scene plays out, because they get him down. Jack tries doing regular CPR. He's pounding on Charlie's chest. He's screaming, "Come on." Kate is sobbing. She gets down next to him. We get a shot where she is facing the camera in the foreground. Behind her, Jack is down hammering on Charlie's chest. And then she gets down next to him and she's like, "Jack, stop. Jack, he's gone. Jack, stop." And he does. And it's a tragic moment.
Music fades out.
Several seconds pass. And then Jack's like, "No, you know what? Fuck that." And just starts doing it again. Kate gets up. We get the almost exact same angle of her in the foreground, hands on hips, crying. Jack's on the ground in the background. And I'm like,
We didn't need that.
why are we doing this a second time? But second time's the charm, I guess, because he hammers the life back into Charlie. After it plays out the exact same way the second time, Kate gets down on the ground next to him. Jack, he's gone. And then magically, he's revived. I do not like this moment here.
For all that, I will say the shot of when they come through the bamboo and just there's that shot from beneath of Charlie just hanging there completely motionless
Oh, it's harrowing.
is still just carrying forward the freakish imagery that they keep hitting in these episodes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, I completely agree.
Yeah.
I just
agree
feel like
that-
they spoil the moment.
So they ruined it by, let's just beat on him.
Well, the end of the episode sets up pretty much the next season and a half. And I got very excited because I didn't realize we were going to get here so soon, which I feel like I just keep saying. I don't know why in my head, man, the way I remember this show, so many of the big moments happen later. But we get our first appearance, as I put it in the notes, Hatch, 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 Hatch.
Senator Orrin Hatch in the first of many cameos.
Yes, exactly. We get Boone and Locke discovering the hatch.
Continuing the trend of Boone failing at everything he does, they find the hatch because Locke throws a flashlight towards him and Boone cannot catch it.
Yeah.
So they hear a clang when it hits the ground.
Yep. Another one of those big reveal moments that as soon as you hear that metallic clang, you immediately go,
What the fuck? Uh-huh. Oh, I so remember that, watching it, and, it just, I couldn't wait an entire week. Oh, God, it was so good.
that was the appeal. That was the charm of this show for so long. You mean I have to wait another week to find out?
Well, and I think that's why you think, I don't know how we're here yet, because this what we've just done tonight would have taken 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we did it in an evening.
Cannot tell y'all what it felt like to have that end of Raised by Another with Ethan, and then just the cut to black, and then you have like a 30-second teaser for what's coming next week that tells you pretty much nothing except that they've been dragged off, and man.
Yeah, it was brutal.
Yeah.
It was brutal.
Well, I feel like that made for such a nice little watch for the three of us, getting that arc there, introducing Ethan, building up to this moment. That's going to pay off in next week's episode, the first of next week's episodes. I think we said we're going to do 4 again. We're going back to doing 4 next week.
There's just so much to dig into in these 3.
Yeah, there's a lot here. Great stuff. Like I said earlier, this is where it's really starting to pick up, really starting to cook. I love it. I took some just very quick, just one overall note about these 3 episodes, which is I really enjoy how much they started leaning into the horror aspects of it at this point. Like the whispers in the woods, that is genuinely creepy. After Rousseau mentions it to Saeed, and you just think like Saeed does, oh, well, maybe she's just crazy from isolation. And then not long after, oh no, I'm in the woods at night, and there are suddenly just whispers all around me.
Have either of you all spent like a sustained amount of time like in the woods, like camping, cabin, something like that?
I mean, probably not an extensive.
I'm not like
we've done it for weekends and stuff.
Yeah, and just there, maybe you know the feeling of being out like in that place where it's like you don't hear city noises. If you hear cars, they're very distant. So you hear maybe some birds, and you might hear running water. But when you hear something that doesn't belong, and you don't know the area well enough to be sure that you know everything.
Okay, yeah, I actually did have that experience.
Yeah.
The one time I remember when we went tent camping, we were in Pisgah Forest, and everything was great. And I should maybe mention, I, until recently, was afraid of the dark. Probably still am, unless I'm in my house. So we went to bed, and we heard a noise, and David is pretty sure that it was a bear, because it was like a whoo, whoo, and I didn't sleep. It was the longest night ever, because all I could imagine was, what's it going to be like to get torn apart by a bear?
Unpleasant, I've heard.
Yeah.
I think it would have been, especially because I couldn't see it. Maybe that would have made it better. I don't know. Yeah.
If The Revenant taught me anything, hey, while we're getting, get to know your host better, there's a reason why I cannot sleep at night without a fan on or some kind of white noise. I can't sleep at night in complete silence like normal people do. And it's because the house that I grew up in was in the middle of nowhere, like way out in the woods. My bedroom faced the wooden walkway that led up to our back door. So I was in bed one night about to fall out. I think I was probably 13, 14 at the time. It's maybe around 11 o'clock at night. My parents are asleep. It's dead silent in the house. And I hear footsteps on that wooden walkway right outside my window. And again, young teenager, don't have the weapons that I do now as an adult gun owner. I was like, what the fuck is this? Who is outside the house? Do I go and wake my dad up, who was an adult gun owner? So I very carefully stuck my head up and peeked through my blinds. And very appropriately for this show, it was a fucking wild boar.
Oh my God.
There was a wild boar in my backyard. And it just took a few more steps. And like you said, the bear, like that noise, that exhale that they make. And then he just stepped off into the grass and fucked off back into the woods.
My work here is done.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I can't fucking hear that ever again. If it's an actual person sneaking up to my back door, I'm just going to have to be surprised.
Yeah.
So since that time, I've started sleeping with some kind of background noise on.
I've never slept in complete silence. Ever.
I can, but Gina likes to have music on, so I've gotten used to that as well.
Yeah. Anyway, Robert, you brought it up. When were you? It sounded like you had personal experience being in the woods, hearing something.
Well, it's mainly just there's a cabin that my mom's family has by the Maury River up in Virginia, so it's just a wonderful place. You just hear the water, you hear the birds. It's There's a highway, but if like in the middle of the week, there's not much traffic on it. But yeah, there are times when I'll be like walking out at night because we used to, when I was a kid, they didn't have indoor plumbing in the cabin. So you had to walk a little ways back up the driveway to these outhouses that were maybe probably only like 30 or 40 feet from the house. But when you're 6 years old, that feels like a mile in the dark. And ever since I was a kid, I was just thinking, what if I heard a voice right next to me? And
Oh, you mean my brain's not the only one that does that?
Yeah, no.
Oh, wow.
So, weird thing, that humans are communal creatures. We like to have other people around. We like to be part of groups, but there is also nothing that gets us like the sound of another person when we think we're alone.
Well, we spent a lot of time talking about Ethan's stare, so I won't beat that dead horse. The other one that I wrote down of the leaning into the horror aspect of it was we get like the movie serial killer's point of view shot, but from Sawyer. We get a first-person shot of him approaching Saeed back at the caves in this last episode, Cowboy Daddy. And I think it's the first and maybe the only time they do that first-person point of view stalking thing. It was an odd moment, but yeah, it added to that horror aesthetic that they've got going on in this batch of episodes. Any final thoughts, you guys?
When they're pursuing Ethan the first time, Locke makes the point that Jack should probably head back to the caves, both because he's exhausted, but also if they catch up to Ethan and there's violence, it would be bad if something happened to the only trained physician on the island, which is both an excellent point and a completely irrefutable one, so Jack ignores it and it's never brought up again. It's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, wow, someone should always be telling Jack, you cannot go off and do this. You need to stay here where it's safe. And no, it's like, okay, well, we tried.
Counterpoint, fuck you, Robert. that is Jack's point of view.
Mm-hmm. He
That
gonna
is
do what he gonna do.
basically the look in his eyes the whole time. Anytime they're trying to just tell him to stop going.
Yeah, this is the beginning of the tension between Jack and Locke.
We do get, I should say, in a counterpoint to our bad dad watch, we do get a good dad mention when Kate talks about knowing how to track because her dad was an Army Ranger and they spent a lot of time in the woods together when she was a kid. And it seems like a good memory for her. So, one person, good dad.
Yeah. And, I mean, it's worth pointing out that Michael won't let Walt traipse off into the woods at night with Locke. So that's kind of a good dad moment. Even if he ignores his son to go play golf.
It's so painful to watch those moments happen because he ignores him, realizes he's screwed up, apologizes, and is like, hey, why don't you take a swing? Nobody will mind. And then they tell him that Michael, it's his turn. He's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go do that. Bye. And it's just, you see all these moments where he's so close to getting it right.
Cara, final thoughts?
Nah, I don't have. We've really just hit everything that I wanted to talk about.
Okay. Well, we ended on our second Jack episode, so I think it's only appropriate that next week we're going to pick up on our second Kate episode. Whatever the case may be. Spoiler alert, the case may be filled with fucking guns.
Yay.
Because that's the one thing they don't have enough of on this island. Let's invent a reason for them to have a bunch of guns. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Robert, if people want to reach out to you online or follow you online, I'm not going to put any caveats on it this week. Where can they find you?
I am still on Twitter. I'm just going to be one of the few when the lights goes out.
You're not. You don't have a blue check, do you?
No.
Okay. All right.
I am eternally unverified. Redbeard Rob 17.
Nice. Cara, you are on Instagram, right?
I am at History Nerd 1861.
Very nice. If you want to follow me online or reach out to me online, you can do that on Instagram at DB Hensley. If you want to keep up with Long Walk Productions, you can visit us online at longwalk.us. To see more of our original work or hear past episodes that are no longer streaming, you can follow the YouTube links in the show notes. Thank you very much for listening, and if you enjoy the show or any of the shows in the Long Walk Podcast Network, please make sure to leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you are listening on.
Cowboys and daddies.
Cowboy Daddy.